as a leader of any age, you're leading up and down, right? Sometimes dealing with your own generation and younger. And I got a little bit of a name of being the millennial whisperer for a while, which is not something that I really liked having that name as a millennial myself. But you have to understand the motivations of those different generations and how they work. Understand how your system works against their value system, how they use their time, how do they think. There's a lot of studies now of how Gen Zs, millennials, and Gen Xers process data differently, how they tackle tasks differently. So what I've learned is,
hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Before we get started, if you enjoy the pod, please take just a second and like, subscribe, share with somebody else, or if you're feeling very generous today, take a second and leave a review. Any or all of those things would be very much appreciated. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Adam Richichi, a leader and entrepreneur who has truly made his mark in the dental industry. As the CEO of Archway Dental Partners, Adam has brought fresh perspectives on scaling and building value in dental practices, focusing on leadership, culture, and technology. Adam, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me again, and nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too. To start our conversation, I was doing a little bit of research on you prior to the scheduled recording here. And I'd love to discuss your career journey. I read that, you started working in a dental practice at the age of 15. Can you share a little bit about kind of your entry into the dental industry and how maybe some of those early experiences shaped you today?
Sure. And as I near my 40th birthday, it's particularly pronounced to have been in the industry this long. But I started working in my hometown dental office on Long Island when I was afternoons after high school. I was 15 years old, pulling charts back when we had charts to pull. That was a job at some point, and answering phones 2 afternoons a week. This little awkward teenage kid who had no idea how to talk to people, patients, or anything. And here I am foisted into a dental office. And, really quickly, I just got obsessed with the operations and the function of a dental practice. Every time I looked at something, I'm like, this is crazy that we're doing it this way and that way. You can imagine I made a lot of friends. A lot of the people who've been in dentistry a lot longer than me, really like this 15-year-old whippersnapper coming in and saying, hey, why don't we organize our charts this way? Or why can't we hire better? Or can't we outfit another room to add capacity at 15, 16 years old? So that was my brain then, how I looked at dentistry. And I'll tell you that I think the most impactful part of my time in starting dentistry so early, it gave me the time to become uncomfortable with some of the things in dentistry that can make you uncomfortable, like intergenerational leadership challenges, having customer service conundrums with patients that are very different than when you sell shoes and you're selling healthcare. All of these things really hit me early on, while I got to be kind of a nerd and geek out over dentistry and learn from the owner doctors at the time about what implant dentistry was like back in the early days of it and how to present treatment plan to patients. So that was where I kind of just got my start. But then over that time, we became a much larger single location practice, from a 3-doctor practice to a 7-doctor practice. I got my opportunity early on in my career to build my first dental office, physical plant, which was a lot of fun and taught me a lot about building the physicality of dentistry. And then we banded together with 6 other practices, and we're one of the first multi-location group practices in New York. And it was a lot of fun. And I got to learn a lot along the way, got my bachelor's in business, my master's in business along the way. And after quite a few years, I'm like, wow, this is great. Dentistry is great, but could there be more than this? And then all of a sudden, the rest of dentistry opened up, and we started seeing group practices scaling, technology entering innovation-deprived industry. And I got just really excited about that. And I kept pulling on that thread quite a bit. And there's a lot in between there and today. But here I am today. I left New York back in 2016 to come up to lead what was then Dental Associates of Connecticut, which was a 4-location, multi-specialty, high-quality group practice, real market leader at the time. And today we find ourselves as the single largest provider of care in the entire state of Connecticut, and expanding throughout New England. Again, a lot have happened. I abbreviated a lot of the fun stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, obviously a lot in there and in that journey. So help me understand, when you started at this practice at 15, did you stay with that practice while going to school, while getting your degrees and getting your MBA? Was that were you working and getting your education kind of concurrently throughout this entire journey?
I ran from undergrad and graduate school classes to the office and to and fro. And, I was the manager of this location by the time I was 18. I was the managing director of all of our locations by the time I was 19. So I was in my MBA program and doing all this at the same time. So there's a challenge, but I do think the proximity and the overlay of those two things happening simultaneously really kind of shaped who I was and allowed me to be a better time manager and just overall use of my faculties. But I was there in that organization for 15 years. So from 15 to 30 with one organization, building it from what it was to how I am.
All right. So you were with the same practice from 15 through 30. What came about that gave you the opportunity to kind of take the role of leading dental associates of Connecticut? And how did you ultimately make the decision to pursue that path?
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a cute story, and it's really part of who I am fundamentally. My organization in New York and Dental Associates of Connecticut shared a Henry Schein rep, and one that was pretty revered in the community for a long time. His name was Mitch Cutler, who had passed away about 15 years ago. And he always told me about this amazing group practice up in Connecticut. Adam, they're doing everything that you guys are doing. They're multi-specialty. They're technologically advanced for what that meant at the time, right? And they have the same clinical and otherwise thesis as you. You got to meet them one day. I heard that for 10 years. And then one day I got a phone call from one of the senior partners here at Dental Associates at the time, that they were looking for a leadership to take them into a certain direction. And they wanted to tell me all about themselves, but I already knew everything about them. I said, I can't wait to talk to you more. And that's how it all started. And I came up from Long Island to meet them here in Connecticut.
Now, when you think back to some of the early days of you managing the practice, when you first got into dental, are there any kind of like lessons that you look back on that you still hold, close to yourself today that you still try to instill in others?
Yeah, a few things I'd say. First is recognizing that there's a real palpable skill cliff between healthcare providers and the rest of the team. Dentists they're doctors, they're surgeons, they have high pressure, high intense environments. They have very tactile skills, very scientific skills. They're very different than the rest of the team. And understanding what makes them different, how it allows you to help support them better. And that is what really formed my entire thesis of supporting dentists at all costs and producing an environment that they want to work in. But we had to understand them first. And they are very different than the average team member. And not just because of how consequential they are, but how they think about problems, about opportunities. So I like to really dissect by meeting dentists of all ages, demographics, specialties over a long period of time. That's a big data set of how people behave in that certain role and environment. And it really taught me a lot about how to lead them later on and how to build environments that support them. Maybe more palatable, but less about dentistry is, again, how to work across generational lines. I was a young guy growing up in a dental group that was predominantly dominated by females and people of older demographics. And that was a challenge. That challenge taught me how to respect up and down and how to gain it up and down as well. And it kind of just contorted just my cultural thesis that we kind of use here today. And, it's enabled me to work in very different environments across different demographics. And I have a team here today that's very demographically diverse. And we love that. And sometimes you just have to know how to work in those environments.
Yeah. So a lot we can impact in both of those things. I love both of those learnings. I want to talk about the demographic one for a second. I think it's really challenging, but also really important to allow for opportunities for the younger generation. I think that they have a lot to offer and a lot to give and a lot of capabilities and strengths that maybe are not as prevalent in an older generation, but there's the lack of perceived experience, right? And so from your experience, kind of walking through this, when you were somebody younger that was having to manage, influence, work with individuals that were older than you, more experienced than you, what are some of the approaches to take that allow you to be effective in that situation?
Sure. And by the way, it goes in all directions too, right? So as a leader of any age, you're leading up and down, right? So that's sometimes dealing with your own generation and younger. And I got a little bit of a name of being the millennial whisperer for a while, which is not something that I really liked having that name as a millennial myself. But
Yes.
you have to understand the motivations of those different generations and how they work, understand how your system works against their value system, how they use their time, how do they think. There's a lot of studies now, which by the way, didn't exist back 20 years ago, of how Gen Zs, millennials, and Gen Xers process data differently, how they tackle tasks differently. So what I've learned is to create an environment and protocols and an operational paradigm that's flexible, that could work in any of those scenarios. So you don't want to ostracize somebody, but you have to be able to do something that works across the board. And one of the examples I use today is the kind of practice management system that we use, right? To have a cloud-based practice management system is almost expected by the average millennial and Gen Z of the world, right? But it is a little alien to some of the older generations. So you have to make it so that your practice is flexible in that way. But I also think it's about showing respect, again, to all generations, and knowing that just because you're older than or younger than does not make you better or more advanced than somebody else. And it's a little bit of a humility pill there. And when you're talking up to older generations, it comes with a certain level of confidence. I think that's a great skill to have, to be able to talk to someone out of your generation. It gives you a confidence in how you speak and how to work with and influence people.
Yeah, as somebody that's kind of on the border of Gen X and millennial, and kind of reflecting on the fact that millennials got a really bad rap for quite some time. And now I think the general viewpoint is that, yeah, millennials are about to take over all these executive leadership positions, and things will change. Gen Z now has like the rap of maybe not being willing to work hard or have these expectations. Do you think that's a bad rap? What has been your experience with the Gen Z workforce?
Yeah, and by the way, this has never been more palatable to feel than in the dentist workforce post-COVID, kind of a consortium of these socioeconomic conditions, which I'll chat about in a second. But, you were right. Millennials are the middle management and the executives of the country right now, right? We're in that age demographic. I'm 40 years old. That's a more and more common age group that you'll see leading organizations these days. So I think we're getting to really learn what millennials really are today, which is significantly more industrious than I think that was looked upon by maybe older generations. But, Gen Z, I look at it this way. They're not lazy. And I don't think we look at, maybe as just being one rung up. I don't look at them as being lazy. I think their motivations are different. They grew up in a world with different things were available to them than were to us. And they look at tomorrow being maybe reserved for living life more than it is about punching in and out. And that's something that's hard to dispute, right? We all want to live life tomorrow and not have to punch in and out, right? So it's maybe learning that you have to deal with some of their realism and some of their lack of realism, and how to create a framework that still motivates them. But they're also some of the most creative people. I think that they look at problems very differently than older generations do. And I think that's awesome. And I think that that's where innovation is going to come from. I've lusted for seeing more and more innovation in our industry for a long time. And I think they're going to be real stirrers there. Where it's reared a different head is, again, post-COVID, when we had everyone reevaluating their life a little bit, none more so than the Gen Z population, who literally were growing up, finishing high school during COVID, right? The millennial Gen Z dentist that comes out of dental school today is very different than the dentist that I grew up leading 20 years ago, 23 years ago. They are less entrepreneurial minded as far as dentistry goes. They're not sprinting to own and buy their own practices. They're not taking over mom and dad's practice anymore. They relish a little more in the ordinary and repeatable nature of what they do, going into work, treating patients, doing a great job, and going home, right? So leading into that a little more is important, because if our industry just expected every practice in this country to be purchased by and led by the next generation, that's just not what they want. And that, juxtaposed to the rise of group practice, kind of worked, right? Because we have opportunity and we have the infrastructure set up and maybe more palatable ownership paradigms to what that suits maybe more of what they want. I think that DSOs are more popular with Gen Z dentists, is maybe my thesis.
Yeah, and let's talk about the difference with dentists for a little bit. That was the first kind of takeaway that you had from early in your career, was the fact that this is a separate segment of the organization that really are unique in their skill set and the value that they bring, and the fact that they are pivotal to the practice of dentistry. And so when you're talking about needing to understand motivations, what drives folks, and how to kind of keep alignment and lead that segment of the team, what are some of your thoughts surrounding that?
Yeah, I think it's one, producing an environment that gives them the balance that they're seeking, right? And then I want to say we break that knob off and say, well, everything's a 9 to 4 job, no weekends. Not breaking that knob off, but we have to be more flexible and say, okay, let's worry about your life and your future. And listen, we could talk about work-life balance till we're blue in the face. It's like an old phrase already. I think the real reality is this generation, and maybe all generations should have had the same opportunity, deserve and want their enterprise that they're a part of to worry about them from, I always say, from residency through retirement, right? So I like to meet a great new dentist out of residency, which by their nature, they're Gen Z, and explain to them and hear from them, what are their wants and their needs? How does that correlate to what I have to offer here? And can we set them on that path? Because listen, what they want today might be different than what they want 15 years from now, 20 years from now. But being concerned about their career on both bookends, I think is a really important strategy, because it's what they look for. It's not their strong suit, and it's kind of what they're looking for in an organization of our scale. So we try our best to give that to them. Similarly to how we look to encircle our providers of any generation, say, this has to be a place you want to do dentistry. If you don't want to do dentistry here, you're not going to be successful. You're going to have icky feelings in your stomach. You're not going to want to come to the practice. So we make sure that we kind of build that type of path for everybody.
Now, you just used the term work-life balance, which I personally have a hard time with. And you have clearly been a hard charger since the age of 15. I mean, you've been managing practices while getting your education and then becoming the CEO of a group that you are continuing to grow and scale. What does work-life balance mean to you?
I think it's already becoming a new trope now. Work-life balance is being pushed aside, and work-life integration, I think, is more common these days. I think that the balance part had a negative connotation to one side or the other, right? So if you were like, I want to go hustle hard, or I want to stay at home, one side is wrong, right? I think that the real answer is how you properly integrate your life. And I have, as you said, I hate this term. I've been hustling since I was 15, moving fast. And maybe it wasn't until my son was born that I realized I got to change my flow a bit, because I'm here for the long game. I have to be valuable to my family, to my organization, for the duration that I can exist, right? And I think what that really means is properly integrating work and life together, having flexibility, knowing that I might take a call on a Saturday at 12 o'clock and I don't want to do it on the weekend, but you know what? I didn't take a call on Thursday at 4. So knowing that that's how life is, you might run to the gym, you might run to a meeting. I think that's a healthier way, and maybe a little bit more of a European way of approaching, that balance is really, really important. And it's given me a little bit more legs and life span, I think, in my professional career, to know that my life is more flexible and integrated than it is saying, well, I got to make sure I get X amount of recreational time in because I had Y amount of work effort. That's an equation that almost never works.
Right. No, agreed. So if we kind of fast forward into your career to when you took over the helm of Dental Associates for Connecticut, and you have some large practices you do a lot of multi-specialty, and you recently rebranded to Archway Dental Partners. Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the thought process that went into that. Why was it important? And, what led to making that change, which I know changes like that are not made lightly. Branding and the perception in a marketplace is always very important. So walk us through a little bit of kind of the thought there.
Sure. And Dental Associates of Connecticut was a name, right? It was a real, and it is still a name. 5 of our practices are still called Dental Associates of Connecticut, but it is a name and a brand. So we took this very seriously in how we rebranded. Now, all of our practices since the 5th one have never been called Dental Associates. They've always maintained their individual brand identity anyway. So this overarching name, not to be funny, but our overarching name was meant to do kind of 2 things. It was meant to create excitement in the market that something new and fresh is coming, because it is. And, we had our sights set on more than just Connecticut and the Northeast. So hard to be in Massachusetts when you're Dental Associates of Connecticut. So we wanted a name that is more flexible, but the branding also, it really We went through a really long creative process to determine how we want to present ourselves. And in the end, we consider ourselves a supportive organization, and thus the thought process of an archway that one sits beneath, right? We really, everything we do is about two functions. It's about supporting our doctors and our doctors being partners of our business, which is why it's Dental Partners, and that we're not just every other dental service organization, and why we have that moniker of Archway, really to give that feel. But back in March of 2023 is when we took on private equity investment here, and it really unlocked some growth potential in our practice and allowed us to set our sights on different places in the market, again, which necessitated some of the additional branding. Now, I will say that in the industry, in the marketplace, we were worried about confusion. Dental Associates was this, and now that very well received, and the intention of what we wanted to communicate to the industry, I think, was very well absorbed.
And how many practices do you have today?
36 today.
36 today. And it was 5 when you became CEO. You said that was 10 years ago?
It was 2016, 8 years ago, it was 4 practices.
8 years ago, it was 4 practices. So a lot of growth in a relatively short time period. And you said that you just brought on a private equity sponsor as well. So as you look forward, how do you think about growth? When is it the right time to add a practice? Do you have to have other practices running at a certain level that allows you to have the confidence that you're able to kind of expand? Is there a risk of expanding too fast and leaving yourself kind of too soft from a leadership or a team position? Talk through some of the way that you evaluate when it's the right time to continue to grow the business.
I think discipline is really important. As you probably observed, our industry, through the mass consolidation that was happening over the last 5 years, they lacked some discipline in this, and it led to some bad stories. And those bad stories affect people, patients, providers. It's not good. So we try our best to be disciplined. What that means is we don't set out to acquire or open 100 practices a year. It's not what we do with the quality, both from a culture perspective and a clinical perspective, can't be done at that scale. And I'm not saying it can't be done. It's not the way in which we look to do it. And in fact, if we don't think that we could be physically proximate to a new location, because we really strongly believe in our support nexus is in the physical real world, right? We're not going to open up a practice in Kansas when we're up here in Connecticut. It's just, we won't be able to support it like we can from Danbury to Newtown. So that's one barometer that could shrink the aperture a bit. The other is, can we literally provide mutual value to each other? If that answer is no, we are not interested in pursuing that engagement, right? Can we improve that practice, the patient care, the team opportunity, the doctor satisfaction, and yes, the productivity and profitability of the practice? That's what we're looking for, right? So not every scenario fits that mold. And it again, narrows the aperture quite a bit. So we want to make sure we're making great partnerships with healthy practices, not the stress practices, that we can help be better and they can help us be better. Our practices that come in through acquisition, most of the time become partners in our organization. So they are now us, right? So keeping that bar high that we're adding value to each other is so stinking essential. And that lens allows us to look at a practice and say, well, how can we add value to this practice? And it allows us to really, every practice is different. When people say they have a model, every single dental practice in this country is different. There's no similar dental practice. They're very, very different. But if we could draw a line and say, here are the 5 great things about this practice, here are the 5 things that are not so great, but we could take those to this state and everyone will be better for it, that's a worthy endeavor to approach. And we set up that kind of value system early on. We work with the seller doc to say, here's what we think we could do for you, but what do you need from us? Mm-hmm. And if it makes sense and we can provide it, sounds like we're a good match for each other.
I really like the approach of that. Can we be mutually beneficial here in this particular engagement? Can we provide value to each other? You mentioned that there had been a time where some discipline was lacking in the space, and there was a lot of acquisitions taking place. A lot of private equity money came in, a lot of groups that are part of a fund that have been in a hold for probably longer than they initially anticipated, that are now having a challenge in kind of determining what the strategy is going to be. Are you finding that as a result of all of that, when you are engaging with selling practices that are looking to affiliate with a group or a DSO, Are they getting more savvy as it relates to doing diligence with the DSO that they want to affiliate with, knowing that there are probably some opportunities out there that may potentially pay a larger multiple, but put you into a bad situation that aren't going to allow you to have the desired outcome?
It's really interesting. The benefit of being in such a highly fragmented market like the Northeast, our own consolidation, our own ears to the ground have allowed us to really understand the perception changes of the solo dentist. And it's really palpable. I would say 5 years ago, we had a pitch to a market that was obviously fragmented for a reason. They did not want to yield to group practice, and pitch to them why what we're doing is great, right? And I got to hear all their trepidation at the time. It was more about what is unknown to them was their trepidation. Now you fast forward today, you're right. They absolutely know more about what DSOs are, what group practice is like, what are the scary stories of, DSOs that go kablooey or equity that blips and disappears. All these things, they become much more astute. But I think that's a great thing, because if you have nothing to hide and you believe in what you do, then these are shortcuts, right? Because instead of explaining to them the form and function of what we do and what we do better, and saying that to maybe unsophisticated ear, they're more sophisticated ears now. So when we talk about private equity events, what it looks like to invest in a group practice, it's becoming known. So when they come into negotiations, of course, they're coming in a little bit better prepared, and that's great. Everyone should have that kind of agency to protect themselves. And if you're a great practice, that still shines through. I will say, there's news headlines, right? DSOs that have some scary stories. And that has a negative effect here too, right? Because you have a lot of more sophisticated ears picking up on more, say, traumatic experiences in the space, which means we have to contend with that and always have to know. I was speaking today with someone who's a communications person in dentistry. And the art of communicating who you are to the dentist today is definitely different than it was a couple of years ago. You have to be able to explain your value, like I just described, as a dental organization, but also as an investment vehicle, as an acquirer, as a consolidator. And I think that's great. Keep us on our toes.
Yeah. And you said a word earlier that's actually one of my favorite words, which is culture. And you mentioned, it's impossible to, you don't want to set just an arbitrary growth goal that's not tied to any sort of realistic ability for the organization to maintain the culture that it has as it scales. As the CEO, I view all CEOs as like the protector of culture for their particular organization. Well, what does culture mean to you, and how would you describe it as it relates to Archway?
Yeah, and it's something that, well, I think we have an amazing culture here. I think it's really industry top. I only could take some credit for protecting it. I didn't build it because it was here when I got here, right? And I think culture, first, you got to know, does your company even have a culture? When I first got here, I walked up to as many human beings as I can. I don't care if you were a dentist, a receptionist, whatever it is. I said, what's important to this company? And when I heard the same 3 to 4 things from everyone's mouth, that's what culture is, right? That's an unspoken set of value systems that fill in the gaps of protocol. That's like the most powerful thing we could have as leaders. It's like creating an evangelist customer out of a team member. I was warmed by that, seeing that here. But then having to protect it is one thing. Having to propagate it is an entirely different thing. And that's challenging. And I think we do a great job at it, but everyone could do that better. And, what is important to us? Right. We care about our providers. We want this to be a place that providers want to do business. We want our team to also want to come to work here over other places, right? And we want our patients to feel like they're getting the best care they can and they have access to it. That's all part of what we care about. And that's what I hope when we walk up, if you were to walk into one of my practices today and ask a random person, I hope they would say those things. And if not, oh boy, but I think they would, right? Sure. So it's setting up that system that gets that to more places and get the pom-pom wavers out there, the communication nodes out there to disseminate your message. It's no different than having a small country, right? If we don't have a news show that could broadcast everyone all the time who we are, it's a very intentional effort that starts with pinnacle leadership, but trickles down to every single individual in the practice. I believe every single team member has a skin in the game in making culture more palpable.
Now, when you're looking to expand, when you're looking to grow, and you need to bring on new team members, over the past few years, especially post-COVID, a recurring theme in the industry has been labor shortages, hard to find individuals, hard to find people of a certain skill set or of a certain will or desire to be great. How has it been for you all lately? What does that environment look like today?
Yeah, it's definitely better than it's been over the last few years, but this is tough. Again, having 23 years in the industry, I can say that this is the hardest labor market that we have ever seen, and probably long before that. It's very unusual. It's fraught with abnormalities and distortions, COVID to a lot of different socioeconomic things. Again, it's improving. I think that there's been an identity crisis that has hit some team members. Dentists trying to figure out what they want to do with their life and their mode of practice. Hygienists trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. Is it chairside dentistry anymore? Is it working for a pharmaceutical company? Is it working in leadership within group practice? Is it working for temporary recruitment agencies, which pluck them out of full-time employment? These are kind of abnormal twinges that we just haven't seen before. And while we roll with it and we do our best we can to, again, if you focus on making yourself the place that people want to be and all the things that lead up to getting there, it could better your chances to navigate in this market, but I won't say that it's easy. And again, I think we're getting better, but I don't know if we're 100% out of the woods yet. And there are parts of this country that are augmenting the delivery care model, right? But some places don't have hygienists anymore, and they're resorting to general dentists providing hygiene. I would like to do my best to preserve the sanctity of how dentistry has gotten done over the last few decades, because a lot of aspects of it that are really good. And any general dentist will tell you they should not be cleaning your teeth, right? So
Sure.
we want to do best for our patients, and that means getting the right team members in the right seats.
So this is a good segue into technology. There's kind of like the promise of maybe solving for some of the labor issues, especially as you standardize, centralized services across an organization with different technology solutions. Of course, AI is a super big buzzword. And in many ways, I think the promise of all of this is still falling a bit short, and that there's still work to be done and innovation that needs to take place for it to really affect your ability to kind of either replace headcount or reallocate resources to different parts of the practice. But when you look at technology today, the landscape, and what different tools you've been evaluating, or what you look to implement, or at least curious about, what are some of the things that you think are exciting? What are some of the things that maybe you're already taking advantage of? And I'll make it a 3-part question to make it extra confusing. What are some of the things that you wish were available that are still kind of lacking from your perspective?
Sure. I will say not only has AI been a buzzword, but we have been, I guess, frustrated is a good word, over the last few years. There has been, went from no innovation in our space to a wellspring of nascent SaaS-based products thrown at us to enable scaling and all these things. And it's created a very noisy space. And that noisy space is very hard to navigate. We're already frustrated in the industry that we need so many technology players to get to what we're trying to achieve. And that might be an improved revenue cycle. And we expect our practice management softwares to do more than they do today, right? I don't think any PMS fully solves what we need, but they're getting there, right? But we're frustrated as we wait for that to happen. I think that when it comes to clinical technology, it's been really interesting. And maybe I'm showing my age a little bit, because when digital dentistry first came out, that was figuring out how to deploy that technology to be a more streamlined organization and to deliver better clinical outcomes was a clearer buying process, right? And it was much clearer strategy versus how do you stitch together a bunch of technologies to do an array of things, like improve your central support apparatus, or maybe improve the work-life scenario of someone sitting at a front desk somewhere, right? So today, things that excite me, and again, AI has been a buzzword for a couple of years now. I'm in automation in general. I do like seeing where some AI agents are coming into play to solve problems that are maybe not glaring problems, but making people's jobs easier. I'd love to see my team be able to interact with an agent that helps them do their jobs better, helps them support them, not replace them, but support them. And for a while, I thought that language of AI is here to support, not replace, was just a marketing pitch. But in reality, if done right, it does supercharge any team member across the practice. So I think we're going to be, in the next year or two, start seeing a little bit more of how those agents come into play in our life to support. Listen, I'm sure you and I have used ChatGPT in the last 24 hours, right?
Yep.
Whatever they helped you with, there's an intrinsic organizational benefit that they can help. So I'm excited to see how they can help make my people's lives easier. I am on the clinical side. I am generally really interested and fascinated by, again, the latest extension of digital dentistry, which I think is 3D printing. I think we're living right now through a revolution in what 3D printing can do for the clinical spaces. And we're only just starting to see this today. We work a lot with SprintRay. I think it's great technology, but we're going to be 3D printing all ceramic crowns and probably by this time next year.
It's pretty incredible.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Like you're 3D printing a rock, basically. It's amazing, right? If I would have thought this was possible 5 years ago, I would say that was science fiction. And what that will be able to do for clinical teams, patients, and our bottom line is palpable. And we should look for that kind of stuff. So it's about really digging around and finding what works for you and your organization. But I think that some of us who are in this scaling mode today are going to do a lot of the proofing for everyone else downstream. And maybe the last point I'll make is about group practices today, brand new emerging group practices, which I was an emerging group practice a few years ago. To scale a dental organization today is much, I hate to use the term easier, but in a way easier because the technologies, the know-how and best practices that exist today and the vendors that are there to support them didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago. So those things that help us scale exist. Now, a legacy organization like myself has to pick and choose what we take off the shelf versus deploy what I have already. And that's challenging. But a new organization sprouting out of the ground, their options are clearer to them.
Yeah. I do think a lot of people feel like they're drowning a little bit in the software side of things because there are so many choices out there and it's hard to actually understand which ones work as intended and which ones don't. For example, if you have a tool that's an AI receptionist, like everybody would want that. It sounds like a great idea. But if every single call ends with the patient saying, talk to a human, and you still have to just have your staff fielding all the calls because it can't actually execute on all the scenarios that might take place, then you're not getting the promised benefit out of it. Same thing when you and I are using ChatGPT. I love right now like the project feature that it has where you can start to upload specific documents, have it trained just on the specific data sets that you want, ask questions and work through different things. But when I'm doing things that are more for the personal, my personal, like, hey, I'm going to take a trip to the big island. We've never been to that island. It's the last island we haven't been to. Write us an agenda itinerary. Oh, that looks great. Go book it. Well, no, now I need to actually do that part myself. So it just ends up still falling short. When you think about different functional areas of your business today, whether it's acquiring new patients would be one, achieving clinical consistency across your organization, or streamlining RCM function and automation, how would you prioritize those 3 things?
Acquiring new patients is obviously very important because that's how you grow, though I think a competency long built into how we do things, right? And if you're looking for shortcuts, you're going to get shortcut reactions, right? So I think that the RCM is we have to admit it to ourselves. It is the hardest, worst thing that we do in dentistry is survive revenue cycle management, right? It's difficult. It's hard. We have players involved that are not on our side, which are payers. And technology there to help make that better I think it was the string that everyone was pulling on as these SaaS-based products started coming out of the woodwork was let's solve revenue cycle because everyone says it's the biggest pain point. But it's also the hardest thing to solve and no one's fully solved it. So I think that's a huge priority. And that might be more than just a product. That might be a synergy between a product, ourselves, the payer community, and a patient. Who knows what that will be in a few years, but something is in there that's going to take away this noise and this silliness. But I am really focused, though, on how these technologies can make our team members' jobs easier. I'm a big believer, and I learned a lot of things early on from mentors in my career. Was one thing someone once said to me that I just didn't agree with. And they said, well, it's someone's job to do this thing. They get paid to do it. They just have to do it. Yeah. I said, well, if you make it easier, no, we don't make it easier. They have to do their job. No, you make someone's job easier, they will perform better. They will have better satisfaction. They will be better correlated and attached to your organization. That's what I want to see technology do for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements of what has to be done in a dental practice that are not the parts that bring joy to the individual that's doing that role. And if you're able to subtract some of those pieces out, the monotonous pieces and the repetitive pieces that could be replaced with automation, you can have a much more effective team member that's providing better outcomes all across the board. You're talking about RCM, and one of the kind of new products that's coming out, and I know that our competitor has it. They were ahead of us in releasing it, but the eligibility enhancement, something that we're about to release as well. Have you been taking advantage of that? Has that been the time saver that it's promised to be? Because on paper, it looks like an amazing tool. We know that not all payers are available and that there are going to be limitations, that it only gets you, 70, 80% probably where you want to be. But are you finding that element of auto logging into payer portals or writing all of the tables back into the solution is really advantageous?
I think it's providing value today. I think the true breadth of value is still forthcoming. We're still adopting, I wouldn't say we're early adopting still, but we're still integrating in. The technology is getting better. But you hit the nail on the head on the first part that makes it really difficult. It's the lack of homogeneity between how payers interact with this technology and thus us. That, which is a hard problem to get over, because I think that's by design, makes it less powerful for our team. But definitely it's there, because if you could avoid at this point, we should not be calling payers to get plan breakdowns, right? That's a 2022 thing. Let's put that in the past. But even going on the website these days, every website's different. Yep. Logins are all over the place. You have, Sally, who's broke the password yesterday and no one else can get into it. These things are definitely helpful. Just, we got to get to the point where they're a little bit more reliable and that they have some homogeneity to what they do.
Yeah. I was talking about this to somebody a couple of weeks back. It feels like there will be no incentive for payers to make any of the changes to make the data more readily available until they're forced to. And so then thinking on what are the forcing hands that would create there to be a need for that? And if we can get AI to the point where all dental groups can have a robot that calls the payers, and now the payers are having to put their own human capital on the phone to talk to robots to get all the information needed, they're spending a ton of money that is no longer being spent on the group side, at least to that same extent, which should be kind of a wake-up call to okay, well, now let's make this all available online. And then if it's all available online and you have bots that are able to scrape the information and normalize it, but you have some that are not doing that, that'll start to kind of apply the pressure there as well. I don't know if it's all going to work out this way, but it would be nice if at some point, because it really does seem obstructionist, and unnecessary.
I mean, you add the component of AI radiography tools like Overjet and Pearl and all that, NVIDIA, which are great, right? And also very nascent. We're just getting our feet wet there, helping with claim adjudication, right? So you throw all the stuff in the soup. You should have the ability to you call my practice, or maybe not call, interact with us in whatever technological way, and be treated and your claim paid in a humanless, seamless environment, right? There's no reason why a claim isn't instantaneously adjudicated and all of those things. But we have to remember, these are all things we've just been talking about. I always call them superpowers. It's great that AI gets these superpowers, but they have those superpowers too, right? So instead of AI haggling with a payer person, it's going to be AI to AI.
Robot to robot.
It's Skynet and incarnate,
That's right.
Who knows what will win there, but it's so obvious that there's waste in this system, that this part could be, that it adds no value to anybody.
Correct. Yep.
Except for when a claim is denied, then it's value somewhere. But I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and it improves the experience for patients, for sure, that stuff.
Yeah. Where do you go to learn? You're a lifelong learner. You continue to grow in your role and lead your organization. When you're looking, to just continue to kind of advance and push yourself, what are some of the things that you look for?
Sure. I mean, one, I try to interact with the rest of the industry as much as possible, try and get out there. And, we talked a little bit before about getting to events and meeting my peers, people who have done this before. I do read quite a bit. I also try outside of healthcare. I mean, I've taken numerous certificate programs from Harvard Business School and Stanford just to keep myself fresh of theory that exists out there. And I took a course a couple of years ago in innovation management. Nothing in there was leadership through innovation. Nothing was new to me, but the framing was helpful. It was an updated framing of how to look at this thing. You know what? I apply that stuff when I go back and I look at how I'm going to deploy Sprint Ray across an organization that doesn't have that today, right? And it's worthwhile to keep yourself fresh in that way. We talked about my career early on. My MBA was very early on in my life. In some ways, one of the reasons why I go back for education every now and then, I kind of miss that pseudo-academic working with your peers to solve conundrum, right? And I almost wish I did it all over again, right? But it's part of it. You just got to keep seeking knowledge and information. When you don't know something, don't pretend like you do, and just find the answer.
And when you think about the dental industry as a whole right now, you talked about some of the things that you're excited about related to the 3D printing and some new technologies. What are some of the things that make you bullish on dental?
Yeah, I think that there is still a vast need of dentistry. Dentistry has never diminished in demand and need. It's only increased. Our access to care, our technology, and awareness of patient awareness of their dentition has unlocked more and more potential. While I still think that there's room ahead for consolidation, particularly in my market, us as an industry learning about how to be successful in consolidating and adding value makes me feel like there's still a wellspring of private practices that want to join something that can add that value to them. That creates runway for us, and that's very exciting. But I do think that we're in this kind of renaissance of looking at dental organizations like organizations and running them like complex organizations. I think so often we talk about scaling, clinical technology, consolidation. When I bump into people, that's all they ask me about. How about thoughtful leadership, culture appropriation, like we've been talking about here today, propagation, I'm sorry. And I think there's more of that now because you have a lot of people. And that's, people could talk about investors coming into our industry being a bad thing, but they've also brought expertise that comes from other areas of healthcare and industry that we didn't have in dentistry. There was a time where it was weird to be an MBA in dentistry. I was one of those weirdos in the beginning, right? I'm glad that there is that sophistication across the industry now and people who are pushing the boundaries of like what it is to be a good leader in a complex dental organization. That's great. I'm glad to be one of those people. I'm happy that that's happening. I think that's going to create a better organization tomorrow.
Adam, it was great to have you on the show today. Thank you very, very much for joining. We'll have to do this again sometime, and looking forward to running into you at some events coming up here in the not too distant future.
Sounds great. Mike, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.